So we've looked at erosion, we've talked about the why and the how and the variables that affect how much erosion is going to happen. But one of my goals throughout this course, this entire year, is I've always tried to show you how what we're studying in class can impact you directly. And I joked at the beginning of the year, it's not like you're going to walk down the street and bump into a mitochondria. You're never going to be standing behind Romeo and Juliet in line at the movie theater. But a lot of the things that we study about in this class could and will and do impact you later on in life. So that's what I'm going to do here today. And you are tasked with doing this: listening, learning. At the end of this presentation, there's a very open-ended assignment where you basically just have to prove to me that you learned something here. So, do we have erosion concerns in our area? I'm telling you, why should you be concerned about it? So let's think about this. Well, what causes more or less erosion? It's pretty much determined by the amount of water we got moving around and how steep the land is. Do we get a lot of rain here? Yes. We have certainly established that Georgia's a place where it rains a lot. Do we have steep gradients in our area? Certainly. Got a lot of hills, we got a lot of rain, water is going to be moving around, that's going to pick up stuff and move it around. We're going to have erosion concerns. One thing I mentioned on here is, what is our ground made of? Well, our ground here is made of clay. Well, remember that clay is that really small particle that likes to get moved around pretty easily because it's such a small piece. So we kind of hit the trifecta of problems or situations that are going to cause a lot of erosion. So how can erosion be bad? Well, we like to have our land where it is. Think about where your yard is and where your house is. You don't want water to move your yard and take it someplace else. If you're this guy who owns this house, nice little riverside, creekside home, looks like he had himself a nice little deck right there, hanging out over the river, and the water came down the stream. And as the water moved down the stream, it grabbed the dirt underneath his deck and it moved it away. Well, if the land underneath the deck got moved away, the deck's not supported anymore. And you can see what can happen here. If erosion continues to happen really bad in this area, well, it's going to take away the land underneath his house. The guy's going to lose his house. I want to show you this picture here. This is from Los Angeles, outside of Los Angeles, where land is at a premium. And there isn't a whole lot of flat land left, especially anymore. And they go up and they build up in the mountains. And the hills overlooking Los Angeles. And it is just incredibly, incredibly steep that they're building on. And you'll kind of notice this looks like a big pile of dirt in here. It's not even like solid rock they're building this house on. This house is, I wouldn't even begin to imagine, certainly more than $1 million. I mean, it's a big fancy house for LA. And even though it doesn't rain very much in Los Angeles, when it does and water falls out of the sky, it seems like it's going to hit this hill, and because it's so steep, it's going to move the hill very easily, which means I run the risk of having my house move down the hill. So this guy here, he's very concerned about not having erosion happen, because if it does, he's going to lose his house. Like this guy here. You see this all over Southern California, where they live on very steep hillsides. And it doesn't usually rain much, but when it does, you get a lot of erosion. If you'll notice this hill here, it's not solid rock. There isn't any rock in there. It looks like kind of sandy, dirty, maybe kind of a little bit of clay in there, and it is. So it moves real easily. So when it did rain, the water was able to move a lot of the stuff easily, and you see what happened. Bad news for these guys that live on top of these hills. Now, this is a little more local. This is a fireworks store over on the border between Georgia and South Carolina. And this guy's got some real serious erosion problems. He's losing his parking lot. If he doesn't change something, he's going to lose his building. Now, let's talk about, why does this guy have so many problems with erosion? Well, first, a lot of impervious surfaces over here. so that when water hits the building or it hits the ground in the parking lot, it all becomes runoff. And more runoff is going to be more erosion. Second big problem here, we had a pretty big drop here. So when the water comes off of that parking lot, it falls straight down. It gets going pretty fast. That's about the steepest gradient you can have. Well, we know that the faster water moves, the more likely it is to move stuff. That's a double whammy. The third reason why we got so much erosion here is, notice what we got here. This is clay. Clay that we have in our soil in this area moves really easy. So this poor guy here, he's got some real serious erosion problems that he's got to fix, because it's going to keep on raining, it's going to keep running off the parking lot, which is an impervious surface, and it's going to keep moving clay until it moves the clay underneath the store and he loses his business. Now, right in here, you can see, looks like we got a big hole in the ground here right by my road. Because what has happened is water is coming down the road when it rains, and we know it's trying to get over here to the river. Well, it comes off the road pretty quick, and it's got a pretty good drop here, so the water gets going pretty fast, and it's moving the stuff right here. Well, if it moves the land underneath my road, I'm going to lose my road. Something like you see here. What happened was we got an extra amount of water coming through this stream, and more water causes more erosion. It moved more stuff from out underneath the road collapsed. Now, this was a situation that impacted me directly. It's really messed up my spring break plans. This is the Pacific Coast Highway along the coast of California, one of the most scenic drives in our country, and I was going to drive it for spring break one year. Flew in San Francisco, and I'm driving down the coast going to San Diego. And the week before I got there, this happened. They had an erosion problem. And what had occurred here was they got a lot more rain than they usually do. Well, notice how steep this land is. So the water slides off very, very quickly. Also, look, that's pretty soft sediments down there. That's not solid rock. That's like sandy dirt, which is small stuff, and it got moved really, really easily. So it was able to cause enough erosion that they lost the road, and it shut down the highway. It was, I can't remember where it was. It was somewhere in here, I think, right in here. Yeah, it was north of Big Sur. It was where the road slid off. And I was going to drive that highway. Now, it was very unfortunate for a lot of the people that work in Big Sur, because they tend to live up here in Monterey, and they would drive this way to work. Well, with the road closed, that means people had to take a big, long detour, because you'll notice there aren't any other roads in here. So instead of being an hour and 22-minute drive along that stretch, it was a 2.5-hour drive. So we don't want land underneath our roads moving, because we need our roads. We expect to have our roads in place. So those are all really big, dramatic, huge landslide, the road's gone. But it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be dramatic to cause a problem. Here's a situation where a homeowner, this is over in Gwinnett County, he's got some water running down the hill because the street's over here, and the water comes off the street and it's just rushing this way. And you can see in here, it's moving stuff. It's moving the land, starting to move the land that's up against his house. Well, now he's starting to notice cracks, and his patio here, this is his concrete patio underneath the house, now has a gap here because the patio is now moving down the hill because the hill is being eroded. That's bad news for this guy, and he needs to do something to fix this erosion problem, or else half his house might slide down the hill. Now, this doesn't look very like a big deal. This is a parking lot over here in East Cobb, and see, water comes off the parking lot when it rains, and it runs through this little drain thing and goes into this drainage ditch, which then goes into a storm drain, gets the water out of the way. Well, somebody didn't build this right, and the water was able to get down in here, and it moved the dirt. It caused some erosion. Well, now the dirt is gone, and you can see this drain is now starting to fall apart, and now more water is going in there, and we're getting more erosion and more stuff being moved every time it rains, which means this parking lot is getting ready to collapse. It's a parking lot. Somebody comes over here and parks their car too close to this curb, and that car weighs a lot, the parking lot's going to collapse. So erosion doesn't have to be a really big, serious, noticeable problem. It can be something little that turns into something big. This is Alpharetta High School. And Alpharetta High School is a fairly new school. Here's our new parking lot. You know, when the school was built, you see the water running down the hill down here. And you can see it's moving some stuff. Well, I came back to this a couple years later and looked at it again. And now look, the stuff that has been moved is now significantly more. And if you don't correct that problem, you're going to have so much stuff being moved that there won't be stuff under the parking lot. The parking lot's going to collapse. This right here, this is a downspout from a gutter. Takes water off the roof and gets it away from the building. Now you notice this downspout is coming straight down. Downspouts usually typically, remember, have those like curved pieces on the end of them. Gets the water away from the building. Well, what probably happened is somebody accidentally knocked off, probably cutting the grass, you know, hit it with a lawnmower or whatever. And now the water is just coming straight out. And look at right here. You see how there's some stuff that's been moved. Well, it's going to continue to rain unless they fix this downspout. More of this stuff is going to move away, and eventually it's not going to be able to hold up this leg of the building. The building is going to start to fall over. And it's not going to be a dramatic like building collapse, but the walls will crack, maybe the doors don't close, the windows break, things like that. So erosion can be a very small problem that turns into a big one if you don't fix it. That also doesn't have to be a fast problem. This is an example of that creep erosion. You see, this is not a landslide. Look, grass is growing on that. Over time, these sediments are just slowly sliding down the hill. Well, the problem is this is a drain for water from the parking lot. I want the water to go this way to get to the storm drain so it doesn't flood my road. Well, as more sediments come down the hill, it's going to block this, and then before you know it, the water comes out in the street where I don't want it. So it can be a slow process, it can be a fast process. Here's a fence I showed you. Notice the fence is leaning. That means this is one of these creep erosion examples where the hill is starting to slide this way. Came back a little while later, and what had happened? Fence was gone because it fell over. So you need to identify little erosion problems before they turn into big ones. If you have a fence in your backyard, like a lot of houses do, and you start to see, hey, you know, my fence seems like it's leaning a little bit. Well, if we don't fix the problem, eventually the erosion is going to take over, and you got a big problem. With your house especially, houses don't bend. So if the ground underneath the house starts to shift, you'll start to get cracks. If you start to see a crack in the house, even a small one, you got to realize, whoa, wait a minute, there's something going on here. The ground is moving, and I need to stop the ground from moving. I need to stop this erosion before it gets to be too big a problem, and I lose my house. This is a case where some builders built some fancy new houses, and they didn't control the erosion. And you can see the ground right here is sliding this way. And you can see these cracks here in the ground. Well, those are really close to these houses, that the house then is going to fall apart and into the ground. Here's what eventually happened to a house that didn't take care of their erosion problem. Patio was shifting, and they didn't do anything about it, to where eventually the deck and the patio just fell off the house because the ground moved too much. Now, this is a big problem. And it could have been something that was a lot more easily fixed if you had identified the problem before it got this bad. Now, the ocean, bunch of water. Water in the ocean is moving. Therefore, water in the ocean can cause erosion. This parking lot right here, you notice in San Diego, see how jagged it is. The parking lot used to be out here somewhere. But the ocean water kept coming and taking sediments away, and part of the parking lot collapsed. So then they had to rebuild the parking lot and make it stop right there. Pacifica, California. Nice little coastal town right there on the water. Driving through there, I noticed this sign on a building. It says, "Building is deemed unsafe for human occupancy." And I look at it, that's a pretty good sized little apartment building. I mean, there's a lot of people in there who had to leave this building. They could not live there anymore. Makes you wonder why. Looks fine, didn't burn down, until you went down on the beach and you turned around and you looked back up on the hillside, and that's what you saw. That's why people couldn't live in that building anymore, because too much stuff has been moved by the ocean that the building is in real danger of collapsing. They've actually gone back now and they've taken that apartment building down because they knew what was going to happen. It was going to fall down the cliff. So you get how taking stuff away can be bad. I don't want the dirt underneath my roads and my houses and my apartment buildings to be taken away. But that's only half the story, because think about when things get taken away, they don't disappear. They got to go somewhere. That's that deposition aspect of it. The sediments get removed from one place, they get eroded, and they get dropped or deposited somewhere else. So sometimes having sediments drop somewhere is just as bad as having them removed from somewhere else. Think about this example. This is a case where we didn't have sediments underneath the road moved. I wound up with sediments on top of the road, because this part of the hill moved. That's erosion. Stuff was being moved. It rained really hard. The ground was pretty steep. The land slid. You had a landslide. Well, now I've got a bunch of junk all over my road here. I don't want sediments on top of my road. Now I got to come and clean this up and dig it up before I can drive on that road again. You would have to think that these people were pretty thankful that that slide happened over here and not right here, because it could have hit their houses. This is a factory in that same state. This is North Carolina, and it was a factory. It was built up against a hillside, and they had a landslide, and it busted right through the wall and came right into the building. You don't want this. This is a case where deposition is bad. You don't want all of these sediments deposited onto your building, onto your house, because you can see what can happen. Certainly road closures are a big problem. In all three of these situations here, I can't drive on these roads. I can't drive on this highway. Again, this one right here, especially, this is US 95. It's a very major highway in that area, and people usually drive there, and now they can't until somebody comes out and gets rid of all of that stuff that is piled up there. So if we can prevent the erosion from happening, we can try to prevent these kind of situations. Now, in all these cases, it's just the road. Could you imagine what it would be like if you were driving along the road when this erosion happened? Well, it's occurred. People have been killed before by their driving along in their car, and you get a rock slide, and you don't have time to get out of the way. The sediment, especially things like a boulder, hits your car. Think about rocks these size. They can do some real serious damage to your car. So if we can prevent this from happening, it would be much better than having to deal with this after the fact. Here's a home in Utah. It's in Rockville, Utah, near Zion National Park, and 2 people were actually killed in this house. This was their little vacation home, their little cabin, and you can see the hillside back up there behind them. Well, it rained pretty hard and it got, the water got moving and it started moving some sediments, and too many sediments, too many rocks came down the hill, and it was enough that it just plowed over the house. Obviously, that's unfortunate. So where we're going with this is, well, what can we do to maybe prevent that? If I want to buy this nice, pretty cabin here, it's my vacation home or to live in, what could I do to maybe keep this from happening? And that's why you would care. I guarantee you that, unfortunately, the people there, they cared about erosion. Here's an example of a rock slide, landslide in Italy. And this was a really extreme case. Some really big sediments got moving. One of them came to rest and stopped right up next to the house. Look at this one here. You can see how it just bulldozed its way down the hill and stopped right there. Now you can imagine, instead of going that direction, imagine had it gone that direction. It would have entirely flattened the house and killed anybody who was inside of it. So this is a reason why we should care about erosion. We should kind of want to predict and prevent stuff like this from happening. Now, this is an example of a mudslide. You think, oh, it's just mud, right? I get rocks are heavy and they can, weigh a lot and have a lot of momentum, knock stuff down. But liquid mudslides can be just as bad. If you're in this house, there's a good chance you didn't survive this because the mud broke out the windows and the doors and came in and covered you up while you were asleep in your bed. So what could be done to maybe help prevent this mudslide from happening, at least in this area here? Now, landslides kill people. And it's not just ancient, like old historical, when people lived in shacks and such, and they didn't know about things like the weather. In 1999, in what's called the Vargas tragedy, there was a series of mudslides in Venezuela, and about 30,000 people were killed over a course of about a 3-day period when they had a significant amount of rain. And you can see this picture here. Look at those really steep hillsides back there. So that when it rains and those sediments start sliding down, they come right into these buildings. So we need to care about erosion because, yes, it can kill you. Now, sedimentation and siltation is a term I threw at you yesterday. Sedimentation and siltation is just when we get sediments dropped where we don't want them. Think about this picture here. Look at that nice, pretty blue water over there of my lake versus this lake here, which is brown. That lake here has a bunch of extra sediments in it. Well, where did it come from? That means there was some runoff that was able to pick up sediments and drop it in my lake. Well, you can see right here, they were building something and they cleared all the trees and it's just a bunch of bare red clay, and clay moves easy. So when it rained here, the water was able to pick up a lot of clay and drop it in that lake. I don't want a bunch of clay in my lake, because if too much dirt winds up in my lake, it fills up with dirt, which means it can't hold water. And I guarantee you these two lakes in this picture were built to handle excess runoff water. And if they got too much dirt in it, they can't hold water. And kind of what's the point? Here you can actually see, here's a stream that came running into a lake. And remember that water in a lake is still. And so when the water from a stream, which is moving, it can handle a lot of sediments, goes into a lake and it stops, it immediately just drops all of that dirt that it's carried, and you could actually see it dropping the dirt. Well, think about this guy here in his boat dock. He doesn't want all that dirt there because eventually he won't have enough water to park his boat. Another very dramatic picture where you can see a sediment-filled watercourse, a river or a stream, is just dumping all kinds of dirt into this lake. And that lake is going to fill up with dirt, which means it can't hold water. This is a process called eutrophication, which is basically just waterways, water courses filling up with sediment, and that changes what they look like. A river that gets too shallow because it's filled up with sediments ends up turning into more of a wetland because now plants can grow in that. The problem is now there's not enough room for water, and the next time it rains, we get floods. In Mountain Park, Georgia is a little town kind of over near Roswell. They got two pretty little lakes there in Mountain Park. And what happened was up here somewhere, somebody built a new neighborhood. And they didn't care much about what erosion they were causing. And here's a stream was coming into their lake and was bringing all these extra sediments. And their lake ended up looking like this. Their lakes filled up with dirt. So instead of having a lake, they had more like a swamp. Well, imagine you have a house on a lake. You don't want to have a house on a swamp. The city of Mountain Park actually sued the developer, and they won because they said, hey, whoa, wait a minute, dude. You let too much of your dirt come into my lake. And the part of the settlement was, well, you got to help pay for getting that dirt back out of my lake. And that's what's happening here. Put a backhoe on a little barge, a little float. You take it there, and you got to scoop up all the extra dirt. You got to put it in a dump truck, take it somewhere, and get rid of it. That's a very expensive process, time-consuming. So it's a lot easier to control erosion on the front end than it is to solve this big problem on the back end. Now think about our retention ponds. Look at this pond here. Look at all that dirt in the water. Remember why this retention pond was built. It was built to hold water. Right now, it's holding water and dirt. And if it holds water and dirt every time it rains, the pond's going to fill up with dirt, then it can't hold as much water, which is why I built it in the first place. So if too many sediments, if too much erosion happens near my retention ponds, I got to do something like this. I got to dredge it. I got to go in there and I got to dig out all the dirt that was eroded and deposited into it. Obviously, once again, I got to pay somebody to do this. They got to rent the equipment. They got to haul off the dirt. Plus, my retention pond's out of service for the whole time I'm working on it. So it's easier to control erosion and keep this from happening. Same thing goes true for storm drains. We don't want sediments to go into the storm drains. Remember what storm drains are meant to transport? Water. They're not meant to transport dirt. They are only meant to transport water. Well, what happens if too much dirt gets in my storm drain? It looks something like this. And this is a problem. Remember that these storm drains help me move a certain amount of water to get it off my street and take it somewhere so it doesn't cause flooding. These storm drains are too filled up with dirt. They can't move as much water for me. So the next time it rains real hard, I can't move the water. I wind up with flooding. So in our area especially, they're very proactive. Anytime you have new construction, the city of Roswell is very careful about making construction sites not let sediments go into the street. If Roswell sees dirty water, like silty water, like clay, orange water flowing down the street, somebody's getting a ticket. Somebody's getting a talking to from the city of Roswell because we don't want this to happen. So for your daily grade today, you got to prove to me that you learned something. You're going to write a summary, and you can do this on your notebook paper, or you can do this on the document if you have access to a printer, or if you want to write on there electronically, like with a stylus or something. And you're going to upload this to Teams. You can make a bulleted list. You can write a couple paragraphs. You can tell me a bunch of interesting facts. Just prove to me that you listened and learned today. And at the end, ask me a question. At some point during this activity, you had to have had some kind of question pop in your mind. I want to hear it.